Hello and welcome to B&E Now, a podcast about independent game development. I'm your host, Tobiah Marks, and with me today is Amanda Lane.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
So, why do you make games, Amanda?
Oh gosh, so I make games because I can't imagine not making games.
It's a pretty common answer on the show.
Is that a pretty common answer? I've been doing anything related to game development, but basically since I got into grad school and realized that making games was a thing that you could do. I originally started out doing just 3D modeling. My bachelor's degree is kind of in just 3D modeling. And
did you think about doing modeling for games, or were you thinking movies?
I was thinking more movies. And then we got Final Fantasy VIII. That was what had just kind of come out when I was, in the middle of that. And then I got into Dungeons and Dragons in college, and that was just kind of the end of
game.
It was a gate. Yeah, it was kind of a, I didn't realize it, but people design these games, huh?
Yeah, the whole industry, people making money.
Yeah, and then I kind of remembered when I was even younger that, I was designing these elaborate role-playing scenarios, or if I looked back and saw that I had drawn Mario maps or that I had modded Doom, and all those things were just fun little things that I did as a kid. But it never occurred to me oh, wait, that's a job that you can do, and people do it, And then I got the opportunity to teach game design. And so I did a lot of game design teaching and met a lot of cool.
So what's the order of operations? You're in grad school for 3D modeling. That's
right.
when you decide this game thing is kind of cool.
This game thing is really cool. I was at my grad school was Michigan State University. I worked with the GEL Lab, which is a games for entertainment and learning. And that's the very, very beginning. They didn't actually have a formal games program at MSU yet. I was one of the first Jellites. It's really funny because
Jellites is a funny name.
Yeah, I just came back from a meaningful play at Michigan State where I was just a couple weeks ago, and I ran back into the old Gel Lab crew. It's all right, now it's a really big group. There's 25 students in the Gel Lab. It was just 2.
Do you mind saying what year this is?
Oh gosh, I think it was 05.
Okay.
So I'm gonna age myself a little bit there, but
it was before the mobile explosion.
It was
before the indie explosion.
Yes, absolutely, and we were still trying to figure out serious games in a lot of ways, and it's really cool to see how much the MSU serious games program has evolved since the nascent days, and how much the serious games in general have really grown and become something bigger and better. Because I back when I was still doing them, we were still sort of trying to feel out how do you do a science learning game? How do you teach people with games? How do you make it not just a quiz? And one of the first games that I worked on was this really cool science. It was in Flash, and I was drawing these weird animals because we were teaching evolutionary theory by drawing these random Pokemon style critters and how they evolve, and also real prehistoric critters were thrown into the mix. So I got to draw these crazy. They had the megaloceros, which is a deer with these gigantic antlers, and all kinds of really weird critters that I got to draw and throw into this Pokemon style game. So that was pretty cool.
That sounds a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. That was one of the first game projects I worked on.
That was a student project?
Well, I was a research assistant.
Oh, okay.
So we were working on that as part of a project to see target audience wise whether or not girls, because we were looking specifically at middle school girls, would be interested in learning with a game like that. And from there, I kind of got into doing research with games, which is something that I've been doing for the past, 10 years or so now. Well, maybe not quite 10 years, but I'm getting close to 10 years. Whereas I would mod a game for the purposes of doing a study.
You kind of got into games first, into the academic games.
Yes, I was mostly academic. I did serious game design and game teaching and game research.
So you were teaching while you were in graduate school, or was it after you graduated?
I taught. I was a teaching assistant, so I did a little TA stuff, and then
for just modeling classes or design or something else.
Let me see. What did I TA in college? It was Flash, and that kind of thing. That was back when a lot of games were still made in Flash.
Yeah, Flash was the dominant platform back then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not so much anymore, but
No, I kind of miss it because, action script, and you could draw, and then you could draw easily in the platform, and then immediately have a game. But I know that things evolve and move on to. And then after that, after I graduated, I was teaching full time at a different school, which was like a smaller private.
And what were you teaching when you started full time?
Game design. 3D modeling, animation, character art.
That's a lot of classes.
Yeah, I was teaching a full load.
Yeah, it's pretty. How did you get a teaching job like that right out of graduate school? Did you just have really good work?
It was a combination of, I put a lot of resumes out there, and it was close by to where I was living, so that was nice. I could walk in, and they were just looking for people. They were really staffing up at the time, and I was fortunate enough to get the gig.
Right place, right time,
yeah,
right people.
And I had an okay
how do you get a
portfolio.
job anyway, right? Like
right.
any job is right place, right time, right people.
I had an okay portfolio. I had made the serious games and made it happen. So there was a really cool mix at that school of like people who were professionals who had retired or had maybe made a couple games and then taught a couple classes on the side, and indies, and like career academics like myself. At the time, I was more of an academic, so that's kind of how I got involved in that whole process.
What did you think of the games industry at the time? Like, you were totally academic. You never actually made games for commercial success. Did you dislike commercial games, or just they were different?
I was living in Ohio, and then I was living in Michigan, and they're just not huge commercial game industry hubs.
And so you would have totally worked in the commercial industry if there was any opportunity,
Yeah,
remotely.
I just at the time I just not have the in to do it, and I didn't have necessarily a way to physically locate myself to those places. Mm-hmm. I did a couple of interviews, and it's
a lot less remote working back then. That changed a lot in just a few years, the amount of remote working.
There was absolutely less chance to, I would have physically had to, like in 2005, I would have physically had to have moved, or 2006, whenever it was I graduated, I had to physically move to a place where I didn't know anyone and didn't, know for sure if the job would have stuck. So it would have been a really tough for me to have just picked up and leave in Michigan. And there was a factor of my husband was still going to school there too. So I couldn't have, we would have been in separate cities and all that stuff. And we weren't married at the time, but, we were hoping on making it work. So
Fair enough. All good reasons.
Then they did a teaching job for a little while. And
were you making games while you were teaching too, or were you just teaching?
Mostly teaching full time.
Okay. That sounds like a full load.
It was a really full load. It was a really full load. And occasionally doing some little mods on the side and messing around, that kind of thing.
But just by yourself, not in a big
just
team
by
or
myself.
anything.
Yeah, I had a couple little mod team projects that fell through, which happens from time to time. This is kind of the story of indie game mods, right? You start on a project and then...
Especially if you're dealing with a lot of students, because, students like to overcommit and then back out, especially because there's no money involved.
Well, it can be a little bit challenging. And that was through that job, I got to go to my first GDC. And I've tried to go every year since, because the GDC is
it's always amazing,
fantastic time.
I recommend everybody, if you can make it out to San Francisco, LA, where's it, China and Germany, I think.
Oh, well, yeah, they do have them everywhere now.
I haven't been to the overseas ones, but
right.
If you can make it to a GDC, go to a GDC.
Through that job, I got connected to Matt Sakey, who runs the website taprepeatedly.com. Mm-hmm. And, he was looking for more contributors. And I was writing a lot in my own blog of just random game reviews, because I enjoy taking games apart critically. And because of my background, where I was an academic and I'm also done game development, and I also am an avid player of games, I have a really broad perspective on critique that I feel like is a little bit different from the stuff you often
knew enough
see in game
about
reviews.
The process that
right,
you were
right.
critiquing it as a game developer, not just a game critic or game player.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit of a weird perspective coming in, and I have a hybrid. I'm a hybrid critic developer, works for a publisher, right? So that kind of gave me this really strange I can go in and write things about a game that most people wouldn't necessarily write about. And so it's been a fun outlet for me to kind of explore like what is interesting in the games that I play to me.
So you're doing that part-time in addition to teaching?
Yes, in addition to teaching part-time and in addition to my full-time Microsoft evangelism job.
Do you ever find that there's like a synergy between being a games critic and teaching game design? Like, are they two separate or no?
Well, there is in the sense that I also do a lot of reading of that same texts. Mm-hmm. So to be able to say to my students, here's the books that you should read. Here's the articles that are going to be valuable to you in the process of making whatever you make. I have those like off the top of my head because I've been doing this for as long as I have, where it's like, okay, read this article, read that article. Here's a person that you should look into. Here's a developer whose work you're going to like, because I have that background in the critical process of reviewing.
Were you self-directed, or do you have like an editor who said, hey, go review this title?
Well, I do have an editor. That's Matt. But he doesn't really tell me what to do necessarily. If anything, it's more of I just tell him what I'm going to do, and he's like, sure, okay. So lately, I've been interviewing indies as well, mostly local indies that I can physically like drive to or find. But what I'm doing is kind of an article format where I'm asking a couple questions and they're emailing me back answers. I'm hoping to actually do some face-to-face interviews at some point too, because this podcasting stuff is pretty cool. There's a really cool indie game scene in Philly, and a lot of people making cool indie games that I just kind of want to highlight and spotlight that, because sometimes you don't know. I'm living in Philadelphia now, by the way. I don't know if we didn't mention that, but I was in Michigan for a little while, and there's a cool indie game scene in Michigan too.
Yeah, especially post indie explosion with the mobile industry. There's indies everywhere. People are able to work remotely. People are able to work with just wherever they happen to be. They have the tools. They have the resources. So, finding a job. I don't know if there's what kind of AAA industry there still is in Philly or Michigan, but now
Philly's pretty indie focused, and that's okay. There's a lot of camaraderie in those indie groups, and they're really fun to hang out with, and they make cool stuff. And
did you try and focus on reviewing just indie developers, or were you also doing AAA titles?
Lately, if I'm writing a review this past year, I've been mostly writing indie reviews. Whether it's, I just reviewed Shadowgate, which is still indie. It's an old NES classic, but it's still made by like an indie group that, it's a re-release. They did a whole new version. And that's probably one of the more recent reviews I've written. But this whole year I've been writing mostly indie reviews. I have reviewed a couple AAA games in the past because they interest me.
Is that a conscious choice on your part, or is that just what you've been playing and what interests you?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I try to find quirky stuff because I'm gravitated toward maybe something that's a little bit different from the general, like the same thing everybody's talking about, but not always. Sometimes everybody's talking about such and such, then I'm going to play it just to see what it's all about. So every year we do like a top 5 games of the year kind of round off, and I've discovered I go about half and half with that. I usually write at least about 2 indies, and I usually write about something big. This is before I worked for Microsoft, but I just loved the crap out of Halo 4. And so I wrote a lot about it. And I didn't review it, but I wrote a lot about like what I saw in it and what it meant to me. And that was a different kind of writing. And I have the freedom to do that because the site that I write for is just pretty much cool with, I want to do an opinion piece and just dig into one part of a game in a lot of depth. I have the freedom to do it. So it's really cool.
That's pretty cool. So you're just finding games by recommendations, all friends telling me, I'm seeing it around. Do people contact you directly and say, hey, play my game?
I get press releases because I have been on the press list now for GDC. I'm on the press list for PAX. I'm on the press list for Indiecade. So a lot of times I will get sent tips from people. And, that is one of the ways that I find out about games. Other times I do a lot of reading. So if I see
some other... Wait, you have to read those press releases ago. I don't want to hold that back on that point.
Yeah.
I would imagine you probably just get hundreds in your inbox. You actually pay any attention to it? Like, it isn't just white noise?
I delete a lot of them.
Okay.
It's just I'm sorry if you sent me a press release and I deleted it. You have to know that they don't all get traction.
I imagine it's got to be in the hundreds and hundreds per month.
You get a lot. But every once in a while I'll see one or somebody will toss me a Steam code and I'll be like, oh boy, yeah, I really want to review that. I really want to give that a shot. Or, oh yeah, that's up my alley. I do gravitate more toward games I think I would be interested in. So that causes me to bias my reviews toward being like good. Well, I don't know if that means anything, but sometimes I'll be surprised and not
you want to play and review the games that you like. It's not a really fair review if you're like, well, I dislike this type of game. Let me review it. Like, if you're not going to like the game, you're not going to like it.
Right. And I know that about myself. So usually I'll wait until something jumps out at me and I'll say, oh, that's a cool idea. That sounds different. I mean, if it's different, I'm going to give it a shot. If it's something that I know I'd be interested in, a lot of times I'll give it a shot. Also, it's a matter of timing. Like right now, maybe I don't have time to play your game. Maybe I'll play it eventually, and I'm willing to branch out and try new things. And so it's just a matter of time. A lot of fortuitous. It hits me at the right place, right time. I'll probably grab it and give it a try. And I do gravitate toward indie titles just because I think they're partially a lot more bite size. Because a lot of times with a bigger game, I don't feel like I
want to
have
invest 80
time
hours
to
plus
do
into every
due
game.
diligence. And it's important to me to do due diligence to the games that I review. I don't want to feel like I'm glossing over. So I don't like embargo times. I don't like to have to rush a review out. I might wait till the game's been out for a month to feel like I've given it, like, this is how much time I've really spent in it. And anytime that I've had an embargo and I've tried to rush the review out, I haven't liked what I wrote, generally speaking. So there's a couple times where it's like, oh, I had a deadline and I put it out, but there's only a few times where I did that and I thought the review was really good.
How long does it take you to write a review? Because you're not doing this, full time. This is more of a side thing for you.
It just depends. Sometimes I'll have pretty much know what I want to say, and it'll be a short thing. Other times I'll have to draft it 4 or 5 times to get it to where I like it. And this is like the process of game review writing, which is kind of esoteric, but like I don't like writing scores. So on Type Repeatedly, we just have a little symbol at the end, like a thumbs up or a flat, and just, whether you like it or not is just, it's not really a numerical thing. It used to be, but none of us really liked that. So it just kind of all got tossed by. Now it's just basically like, was it okay? Do you recommend it? Nah, maybe not. Yes, no. And I like that better because I want you to read the frickin' text that I wrote. I mean,
it's bottom line. That's why all people are looking at that number. All they do is they decide, all right, if it's above a 7.5, I'm going to try it. That's all people are really looking for.
And then you get these review scores. It's like every game is between a 7 and a 9 because that's the only thing you're allowed to say.
Yeah, there's that whole issue.
Right, and I just don't. If I don't like a game, I'll straight up say in the text, and then maybe I'll be like, okay, there's a couple things I didn't like, and here's the rest. But I do gravitate toward reviewing games that I enjoyed because if I had something to say about a game, I probably want to write about it in a way that maybe there's something interesting about the game that I just really want to explore in more depth.
How many games would you say are ones that friends or Twitter people or somebody recommended to you versus like cold calls from the developer? Because there's a lot of developers listening who want more people to see and review their games, and they religiously send out emails to reviewers trying to get notice. Is it like 1 in 10 get noticed? Is it half and half? Like how many?
Oh, as far as press releases go, I don't even know if I read 1 in 20. But I mean, that's a horrible thing to say. I know,
but you read 1 in 20. But is it that 1 in 20 the one that you review, or is most of reviews comprised of these cold calls, or are the cold emails, or is it mostly you just someone talked about this on Twitter, I'm going to go review that now?
Sometimes it's that I have, I don't want to say a previous relationship with the developer, but like I know the name of the developer, or I know what their work is like.
You've seen an article written about them. Something like that.
Or I played one of their previous games and knew that I liked it, so I, contact them for a press copy of the next one, or just, to find out where I can buy the next one.
So you reach out to that cold email.
I've reached out to developers before. Usually they'll send me a press release, and then I'll reach back and say, yes, I'm interested, maybe. And there's a whole process there of that. If it's a console game, I usually just go out and buy it. And that, a lot of times it's easier to get like Steam copies for reviews if sometimes they'll just straight up email you random Steam copies and you have no intention of reviewing the game or you don't know if you'll review the game or not.
How can you expect a review if you don't have the game, right?
If you don't have the game.
And you get the Steam keys for like nothing.
So they just are like, woo, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, Steam key. And that'll work sometimes. It's really, like I said, it depends a lot on, do I have the time right now to take on that game too? And if it a game that looks bite-sized to me? And there's times when it's like, I might be like, oh, I'm going to review this, and then it takes me a month to get around to the game. So I have the flexibility on the site where I write that I can do that kind of stuff, where a lot of people are trapped with embargoes and stuff and they can't. But I feel like the advantage in that process is at least that I did my due diligence with the game, and they require us, or not require, but pretty much there's a little template at the end we fill out. We talk about how much time we spent playing the game, whether it's 8 hours or 20 or 40 or 60.
So that way the reader knows.
Right. So I'm still playing Bravely Default because I only play it when I'm on the plane.
You're still playing it now?
Yeah.
I gave up on that game months ago.
I'm still playing it because I only play it when I'm on the plane. And I've logged 40 hours in that game. So I know that
I've logged more than that.
So
now.
I know that if I ever, I know, right? Because like I said, whenever I
got
have
bored
minutes,
with that after 60 or so.
Whenever if I ever write a review,
Actually, I think I'm over 100 now.
I'm gonna be.
It.
Oh, really? Is it really that long? Whoa.
No, I didn't even finish. I don't know anyone who's finished that game.
So if I ever write a review, I'll either be saying, okay, look, I got to this. I played 90 hours. I'm done with it. I feel complete at 90 hours. But here's the full disclosure.
There's just so much content.
Right.
It just
here's
never
the full
stops.
disclosure of how much time I spent playing this game. And if I didn't, if I got stuck and didn't finish it, but I really enjoyed it, or I got stuck or I beat it and it only took me this much time and I'm not side questing or whatever it is, however it goes. I try to be honest. But I feel like the best writing I've done is always if I had something weird to say about the game. Yeah. And you never know unless sometimes this is true. Sometimes I'll read reviews of a game and something about the way someone talks about the game will make me interested in getting it. I just picked up Shadow of Mordor, and I've been loving it, by the way. It's just fantastic. But the reason I bought it was because there were so many editorials about, oh, it's really violent, and it's kind of weirds me out. I'm like, really? Huh? I want to know what this is that people are complaining about. Or I bought Dragon's Crown because the art was very controversial, and I loved that game too. And I wrote a review of it that was equally controversial because I was like, hey, listen, I like this for this that reason, and it was a weird thing I think for a lady to say. One of my other favorite games is Deadly Premonition. Have you played that one?
I haven't.
Oh, it's fantastic. But the reason that I got it was I was still teaching at the time. And one of my co-teachers said, hey, I've read all the reviews of this game, and people say it's really, really, really bad. And I was like, what? Really? Huh. He just said, oh, it's really bad. Huh, okay. So he bought it, and we played it in a classroom. So let's see, how bad is this? And we played it for a couple hours, and it's got a lot of weirdness. It's got, one tree model repeated dozens and dozens of times. And the character facial expressions they feel a little off and weird, and there's a lot going on.
It's like in a beta version.
Yeah, and it feels a little half finished at first. But I kept playing it. And after class was over, I was still playing it. And I played it for maybe 6 hours, within 2 days. And I said, you know what? This isn't bad. This is good. This is really good. But you had to kind of get underneath the unpolished surface to figure out why it was good. And
it says a lot how a little thing could go a long way towards making people not like your game.
Right.
You just had 7 types of tree models instead of 1.
But I think the fact is that a lot of people have seen underneath the skin of that game as well, because that's a game that has been a cult hit. And a lot of the early reviews were 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, and then there's a 10 out of 10 review on Destructoid that was Jim Sterling's review, and he's like, this game is so bad it's good. And I'm like, well, I would disagree in the sense that it's not so bad it's good. It's really, really good.
It's good, but it's rough around the edge.
It's good, but it's rough around the edges.
Interesting perspective.
Yeah, and I loved it. And he has a new game out. The same developer has a new game out on the Xbox One that I would recommend everybody buy, which is called D4. If you have an Xbox One, you should buy D4.
Very cool.
It's amazing.
So let's get to talking about you. So you're teaching, you're doing reviews.
Yep.
Now you're an evangelist for Microsoft, just like I am.
I am.
How did that transition happen?
I was working for Shell Games in Pittsburgh, and we had a project called Game Sprout.
So wait, first off, let's rewind it. How did you get a job for Shell Games? Like, were you teaching and doing that, or did you switch from teaching to that?
Strangely enough, I applied. So
one way to get a job?
It was a community management job, right?
Okay.
And I had just come out of a community management job for a different company where I had worked for a little while, about 6 months or so, on some Facebook titles. And that company kind of decided that they weren't going to continue to do as much effort into the games because they had other apps that were music apps, Idle Media, and they do an app called DatPiff, and that's like a big hit for them. So it's sort of like, well, we're going to focus more on the side of the business a little bit, but they're still all great folks. You know, I don't have none of my previous jobs I have any hard feelings about or anything. So I ended up going to Pittsburgh for a little while. And it was tough because my husband and I were in separate apartments, and now we're married. So working with Jesse Shell was a total dream. I mean, that was just an amazing gig. And I was doing community management out there as well. But GameSprout was a weird project. So it was sort of a experimental project for them, and they kind of decided to take that a different direction. So it was sort of the right time for me to move back to Philadelphia and do this Microsoft job. And it opened up, and I was really fortunate in that, and it's been a cool job.
So what do you like about evangelism?
Well, the cool thing is that my previous lives as teaching and academic and writing all kind of can be funneled into that same energy of teaching people how to make games, which is something that I've been doing for a really long time. And teaching people how to make other software. I mean, I've been talking a lot about games, but we also do a lot with startups. Mm-hmm. So we're talking to indie developers of all stripes, whether you're starting a business for health, whether you're starting a business for, civic stuff, like civic local tech, government,
whatever,
civic tech.
Yeah.
And it's all a whole new world for me, a lot of this stuff. And it's some of it's like, oh, I've never done any Internet of Things before. Like, how do I take this apart and make it work? And there's just so much to learn out there in the world. But it's neat because I can really meet all the people that are making all these interesting projects and get a chance to see what they're doing and see what kind of cool stuff, and hopefully eventually make more cool stuff of my own. And
you're kind of doing like everything now because you're doing this evangelism. Yeah. You're back to teaching.
Right.
So you're actually teaching a college class.
I'm teaching it, and in fact, right now I am a very, I could be. I think we were gonna meet like a few minutes ago, and we were still recording in the Microsoft studio. But I'm teaching.
Yeah, as of this recording,
world.
We are in Seattle. That's why we're on the portable sound setup.
Right.
If the quality is not as good, I apologize. But we were just recording a Microsoft Virtual Academy on the basics of game production, which you should be able to check out by the time this podcast goes on.
So exciting. So, I'm also working with Girl Develop It in Philadelphia, and I'm teaching game development basics for them. And because a lot of my background is in game art originally, then we're looking at how to create animated graphics in Photoshop. And that's going to be tomorrow night, as of right now when we're recording. And yeah, so I'm teaching at Harrisburg. I have 2 students, so it's a semi-independent study.
Okay. And so that's more reasonable. I was wondering, like, how are you able to accomplish teaching and evangelism and still writing for the reviews and everything? Like, how are you going to be able to do that?
My writing output has been a lot less than since I started doing the evangelism stuff. But I think it's reasonable. I have slowed down a little bit in some of that stuff, but I try to keep all the balls in the air. Like I said, my latest project, I've been doing a lot of interviews because I want to talk to people about what they're making and highlight maybe some of the developers that you haven't heard of, because in Philly, there's a lot of cool folks making cool stuff. We have some folks that presented their stuff at Indiecade recently that I wanted to, see what they were making, and just Philly, it's neat to be in that environment.
Very cool. So you've been in the game industry, you've been working for game companies, you've been teaching game design. You've had a kind of a different perspective than a lot of people's normal path through the industry.
I don't know if there is a normal path through the industry.
That's a fair point, because no one really has a normal path. But most people, they get started in indie company, then they get industry, or they get the industry, then they go indie. And that's usually what I talk to on the show. Most people I've talked to, I haven't really talked to that many game academics, period. Haven't talked to many game reviewers, period. And then doing both of those and doing the evangelism thing. Okay, let's rewind the clock. Let's say you can go back to that 2005 time where you're just starting to look at the games and you could tell yourself something. What would you say? Like, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, first of all, I would tell myself not to be discouraged with the job hunt process, because I remember that being bumpy, and I think it's always going to be bumpy. And it's, that's just, it's something that you learn as life goes on. Right. And I don't know. I think that's probably the best. I think I would just say, keep your chin up and keep trying.
Keep applying jobs. Keep going.
Eventually, you're gonna be able to do all this cool stuff, and it's gonna be great. I probably would have gone to GDC way sooner. Also, if I had known what a great tool that was for networking and for just learning things. And I mean, I probably would have tried to save up the money and go, because when you're young and you've got the ability to kind of pack up and go for a week, if you can scare up the money, you should totally do it, because it's worth it to go. That's another thing that I think I would have said.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So I also like to talk on the show about games we've been playing lately. You already mentioned Shadows of Mordor is one you've been playing more lately. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because I've been hearing so much in the news about it, and I haven't decided if I want to buy it or not yet.
Well, I'm definitely... Actually, I've already drafted not really a review, but like an editorial about it, about what I think is interesting about the game. And what I think is interesting about the game is different from what everybody else thinks is interesting about the game. I've read a couple articles that kind of touch on what I like about it, but a lot of people are focused a little bit on maybe the violence in the game, or how you kind of have to interact with these orcs in a violent way. Now, I'm kind of a big Tolkien fan. I mean, I've read the Silmarillion, which is a lot of what this game is based on. But on the other hand, when you look at the orcs in the game, the orcs are flavored with a lot of like our understanding of orcs, as opposed to like the Silmarillion orcs. Like, there's a little Warhammer in there. It's not truly a Tolkien. It's got filtered a little bit in a really interesting way. So you've got this kind of hybrid orc race that they say stuff like mucking about, which is very Warhammer. Yeah, and you can. They got a lot more of the comedy, I think. That, they're a little bit wacky. They're a little bit slapstick. There's a little bit of wacky slapstick in there, and you feel that transition, all those different things kind of tainting it up, and there's a lot of strategy in the game, about like how to approach these different guys, and like you can sort of pick a guy that you want a king make and watch him kind of develop his orc career, and that's it. I feel like it would make a really interesting board game. Oh, interesting. Why do you say that? And that's one of the few, like, usually open world games. Like, I wasn't super impressed by Watch Dogs. And I think it's okay to say that, because like, okay, you've got a mission, you do the mission, you got another mission, you do the mission. It's all kind of loosely taped together with this story that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I feel like in Mordor, even without like the story framing, which is pretty neat, but even without that, there's sort of you've got these guys and they're all like chess pieces on this weird orc army board. And they have relationships with each other that you can sort of navigate like as a social network. And if you decide that you want a particular guy to do better than another guy, you can sort of back him in subtle ways by killing his rivals or whatever in order to sort of shift these pieces around. And there's like a bottom row of low-ranking orc leaders. And it's in your best interest, not necessarily to eliminate them, because somebody else might step up and take their place if you do, and you don't know who that guy is. So it's kind of in your best interest to learn about these guys without necessarily just slaughtering them. It isn't your typical assassin, take a target, kill a target, take a target, kill a target. You can't just slaughter them. But if you just kind of slaughter them, they'll just all get replaced with different guys. So it's more in your best interest to sort of, and I can almost imagine this like as a bunch of cards down a table that you flip over, and that as you remove a card, then another card comes
That
up.
would be a good game design exercise.
Yeah,
make a
I really want to
game or
just make
board
a
game.
card game out of this game and out of that process in the game. I just think it would be just really fun. And
Sounds really cool.
I don't know.
Okay, you've convinced me. It looks like I'm going to have to pick it up now.
well, everybody that I've said, well, it'd be really, really fun card game. It'd be a really fun board game. They're like, really? I've never heard that about an open world game before. Most open world
Yeah,
games
I've never
are-
heard someone say like, "Oh man, I love Grand Theft Auto. I wish it was a board game."
Right, but that's how I feel about more. Like, man, I wish this was a card game that I could just take with me and I could flip over orc cards and
And I am obsessive over cardboard games. So if you're like, if it's inspiring you for a board game, I gotta see this and I gotta check it out,
and
form an opinion myself.
I really do like board games. I like board games and card games. I go to Origins in Columbus every year, which is mostly board games and card games and role playing games. Play a lot of D&D. I really, really miss my D&D crew. I wish that's the one ball that I have totally dropped in that I haven't played
Yeah,
D&D
I had
in
to
a long
drop
time.
pen and paper stuff when I want to get into an Eclipse Phase group, but that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, I was running 4th edition. Was a really fun campaign. I was really enjoying it. When I got this job at Microsoft, I emailed them and said, hey, let's pick up the D&D game again. And they were like, yeah. And then I was like, oh, I don't have any free time anymore.
Yep, there goes free time. It's gone.
Because I'm doing 3 jobs and then some. So
Yep. I understand
so
that pain. I understand
the D&D thing
completely.
is kind of I still play video games when I have spare time. Obviously, D&D takes some preparation to do
You have
right.
to meet at the same time every week, and that's the one problem with this job.
And D&D takes some preparation to do right as well. And I like to write my own adventures. I like to design my own monsters. I like to do it upright. I'm not a person that'll just grab a module and run it. So that's something that, I'm a very nitpicky about my D&D campaigns.
Makes sense. For me, playing, it's funny because my pick of the week is actually along those lines of not having time. I've been playing Sudoku for Windows Phone. And I know that sounds like, it's not that great of a game because Sudoku's been around forever. But I've been flying and traveling a lot, as anyone who knows me is, But I'm on the plane and I just get really addicted to just the meditative state of Sudoku. I do it the hardest end puzzle. I try to fill out all the pencil marks and I try to go as fast as I can. And it's a really meditative thing for me. It's something I can play over and over again.
Okay, have you ever played 9990 Escape?
Yeah, I have actually, and I'm in the middle of Virtue's Last Reward, which is the sequel.
Loved it.
And I haven't
Yes.
completed it yet. I've gone
I thought
one
that improved
of, like,
a lot
9
on the
endings.
original.
Yeah, no, it's really
Yeah.
good, but it's a Vita game, and I don't bring my Vita with me. It's sitting at home right now, and I
I just-
still haven't.
I just
I've
thought
actually
of that.
mentioned on this show.
I just thought of that
Virtue's
because
Last Reward.
999 is like Sudoku or die.
No, 999 is. I loved that game so much. Like I would wish people could go straight to the sequel, but you have to play the first one.
Right.
And then you
The
gotta track-
sequel, as far as like structurally, improves a lot on the original. In terms of like structural, but you won't really understand the story unless you play the first.
But
one.
you're absolutely right. Like,
Yeah.
I totally clicked
Yeah.
with the game for just logic puzzles. I love that stuff so much. And it's funny. Oh man, what's that DS game now? Professor something.
Professor Layton?
Yes. I never got as into those because they're always random puzzles, and a lot of the puzzles are basically like you think it's logic, but it ends up being Where's Waldo?
Oh,
If that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah,
Like you
no,
think
I
it's
get you.
logic, and then it's like all about wait, did you notice this one little thing? And it's not as
Right.
it's designed for more for kids, right? It's not designed for you to pull out pencils and paper. And not that I'm doing that,
No,
on
I'm
Windows
into
Phone
the really
Sudoku,
deep,
but-
nerdy logic stuff.
yeah,
it's
it's
really fun.
it's just nice to meditatively do that. I guess Ricochet Robots is a really good board game comparison. Have you played that one? Have you
No,
heard
I
of it?
haven't.
It's a board game that very few of my friends also enjoy, and even fewer friends will willingly play with me because I'm unfortunately good at it.
Oh, sure.
And I don't, it's
sure.
not like a braggy thing, but it's a board game with 1 to infinite amount of players. That should say something. 1 to infinite.
1 to infinite.
And all the board game is a puzzle.
Oh.
I won't even bother describing
Huh.
it. But you just look at it, and the first person to solve the puzzle wins.
Really?
I've played this game drunk, and
And-
we played it like, oh, you have to drink before you play the next puzzle. And
Wow.
it's
That's fun.
It's a little Sudoku-y logical thing, and it's fun to like sit there and try and solve it. And if you're at friends at a party and you're drinking and you've played the game a lot, you solve the puzzle faster.
Oh yeah,
and it's just really hard to like, wait, I want you to play this, but I can't play with you.
That's how I feel about Smash. I'm not good at it. I bought it, but I'm not good at it. So sometimes I'll be like, can I play Smash with you? It's like, okay, but I'm going to lose. And then it's going to be boring for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite part of Smash. My favorite part of Smash is the metagame where people are discussing who's going to come out and who's going to be in the game. And they found a hidden character. My least favorite part of Smash is the metagame where people argue about what stages to ban and what items can and can't be turned on. So both parts of Smash, the part that I love is a metagame thing, and the part that I hate is a metagame thing. And the actual game I can take or leave somewhere in the middle.
If you looked at my game consoles, you might think I'm a hardcore Smash player because my Wii has everything unlocked. But in actuality, I've never played.
Oh, really?
On my Wii.
Oh,
it's hilarious because I just had friends over all the time.
Oh,
so
and they just played. Yeah,
I bought the game for them. They played it on my system for me. They unlocked everything for me, and I've still never opened it.
I'm still unlocking stuff in the 3DS version of the game, and I'll play it, pop it open every once in a while, and just play a couple rounds like against the CPU or against some of my friends online. But I'm terrible at the actual like act of Smash.
I agree. I'm also terrible at it. All right. Well, if you want to find more about me, you can go to my blog, tobiahmarks.com, where I have useful information, cool things like that. If you want to find more about the show, beindynow.com, past episodes, show notes, links, all that cool stuff. Where can we find more about you, Amanda?
My blog is secondtruth.com. That's second, like as in the thing after first, and then truth, like, and
not a lie.
Like not a lie, right? Like, and then I've had that URL for like 12 years now. It's crazy. I looked to see when I registered that, and like I was pretty young. So it's been there for a long time. And then I also blog at tap-repeatedly.com.
Tap-repeatedly. And what's your Twitter?
My Twitter is also Second Truth. There's an underline between the second and the truth.
So second underbar truth.
Yes, correct.
All right, excellent. And I'm at Tobiah Marks, if I forgot to mention that. All right, well, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's been fun.
All right, for everyone else out there, go out and make some games.